This program is presented by Community Television. A simulcast can be found on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
Welcome to the Chippewa Valley Sustainable Future Festival. Seamus Funk presents New Emerging Technologies.
This is Seamus Funk. He's the Associate Dean of Energy, Agriculture, Construction, and Technology at Chippewa Valley Technical College. While earning his PhD in Physical Chemistry at NDSU, he worked on numerous surface chemistry projects, including DOE-funded research on clean coal technology. After graduation, Dr. Funk worked for an SBIR-based biotechnology company, proposing and developing new technologies for various government agencies. Through collaborations with esteemed scientists within NASA and the USDA and private corporations, Dr. Funk strives to find applications for advanced research and development in technical college system. Welcome, Dr. Funk.
Thanks. Hi. Basically, what I was going to talk about today is just a little overview of current technologies that are, I'd say, renewable energy based, but not just, wind, not just solar, a little bit of other things, and kind of how they can be applied in western Wisconsin, because, as you know, we don't always have sunny days like this where, solar power makes a lot of sense. So the goal is kind of take a grander overview of this whole thing. A little bit about my background. I am a chemistry instructor currently at Chippewa Valley Technical College. I just, as of May, stepped down in my role as the Associate Dean of Energy, Agriculture, Construction, Technology. At the college, we're doing a lot for energy. We're actually building, or hopefully building, an energy education center, which will house all of our energy-related programs, try to serve as a demonstration site as well as, a training site for future students in the energy sectors. I have a background in physical chemistry. I have a PhD on that side of things, so I've worked with DOE project, Department of Energy projects. I worked at a biotechnology company where I worked on, USDA projects and some other, renewable energy products, looking at chemical conversions of biomass and other related technologies. So I'll talk a little bit about that sort of thing and whether that actually works in western Wisconsin or not. So that's the big question, because we want this to be working here, not what's going to work elsewhere. We're going to be looking first off at the technology side of things. So I'll talk about a little bit of advances that are happening in the efficiency side of things. Talk about advanced biofuels and bioenergy and what that all means in the area. Briefly review what we consider, traditional renewables, even though renewable is kind of a newer term in the general idea, but looking at solar energy, wind energy, some hydropower innovations that are happening. And then look at some things that are actually unique to western Wisconsin, more on the bioenergy side of things. And then lastly, we're going to try and talk about whose responsibility it is, whether it's the universities to get the research, whether it's the publics to buy purchase the energy, and exactly what's going to work out best, whether it's private corporations that should be funding these things, and the role that different agencies have in this whole process. Big question we have is and the big initiative that happened a couple of years ago is called the 25 by 25. The goal is to have 25% of our nation's energy resources provided by renewable sources by the year 2025. So that means in 13 years we need to go from about 11% of our energy that's currently produced by renewable sources and more than double that. Other end of that you could look at is calling it the 75% by 2025. So when this happens, we're still going to have 75% of our energy needs being met by traditional renewable or traditional energy sources. And part of that means that even if we're going to make a huge push towards wind and a huge push towards solar, there's still that remaining gap that needs to be improved upon. And what can we do on that? And I'll take a little bit of a look as to how current technologies have gone to improve those areas as well. So this is kind of the starting point. It always frustrates me when I go into a sustainability festival and you see people talking about installing solar on your home and installing wind on your home. Before we can get to any of that, it makes no sense to have renewable energy if that energy is just going out your window. So I always like to think of innovations in energy starting with the efficiency side. And looking at that for us, that means efficiency at home, whether it's a home energy audit, whether it's stuff like the Student Office of Sustainability is doing at University of Wisconsin with their student audits of rental properties. The idea is to, instead of making this big push and having our power supplied by solar and then having the heat go out the window or that electricity wasted, we may as well take a look at what can be done, from an efficiency standpoint at home. So it's just one of those things I like to remind. Although there's all sorts of advancements in the renewable energy technology, it should really start on the efficiency side. So again, before people come here and they'll take all sorts of literature away about how they can get solar in their home, how they can get geothermal energy in their home. The first step, as far as saving money as a consumer, should be to look at that efficiency side. And we'll talk a little bit more about what efficiency looks like, not necessarily in the home, but also on the production side of things. So if we're looking at how to make renewable energy more efficient, just a couple little examples. Biodiesel. At CVTC we have a biodiesel energy demonstration lab where we're actually able to produce biodiesel from crops that our students produce. Just in what we see, there's huge areas for improvement in how we grow our crops, how much seeds or how many bushels of seed we can get per acre. We look at the extraction process, whether we can get 80% of the oil out compared to 85% of the oil. There's always this trade-off between the time that you're putting into these processes and what you're actually able to get out. So there's do you want to run the spent material through a second time and looking at the efficiency of certain processes? Because at some point, almost all these renewable energy technologies require an energy input. So we need to weigh that energy input that we're putting in as to what we're actually pulling out. And there are side products. The one big thing that I think goes a long ways towards sustainability as a whole is what we're doing with our waste products. So in the biodiesel production process, for example, we produce the general idea is we're crushing a seed or we're pressing a seed and we're pulling all the oil out, and then we have this leftover seed. Now if you throw that leftover seed away, the cost of our oil is about $7 or $8 a gallon, or the cost of our diesel is $7 or $8 a gallon, and nobody at this point is going to buy diesel for $7 or $8 a gallon. If you find a market for that product, whether it's as a feed or whether we're using it as a burnt pellet fuel, whatever it may be, all of a sudden that cost starts being brought down, and that's whether you call it efficiency or utilization. It's the same general idea. Under that same idea, Ace Ethanol, which is based out of Stanley, Wisconsin, traditional ethanol plants have a huge amount of CO2 loss, for example. Ace Ethanol has decided that that's a worthwhile investment for them to capture that CO2, and they're actually using it to make dry ice. So there's not a huge market for dry ice, but if you've got this CO2 product and otherwise it goes to waste, you can increase the efficiency, you can increase the marketability of your product and the cost effectiveness just by utilizing that CO2 product. And the last one that I'll talk about just as efficiency in production relates to anaerobic digestion. So as part of a focus on energy feasibility study, the college looked at putting an anaerobic digester, and I'll talk about anaerobic digestion a little bit more a little bit later. But the general idea is we take waste products and we convert that waste product to a natural gas product that can be used. That said, once we take garbage, say you take organic waste, and we convert that, there's still going to be 60% of that material remaining. If you throw that material, or if you have to put that into a landfill, it doesn't make any sense. Financially, you can't make it happen in the same manner. So if you have to have a spot for that waste utilization, whether it's composting and selling that compost, the side that goes unseen is what we're actually doing with our waste or side products. I don't like using the word waste products because really there shouldn't be a waste product. There's just side products that are happening in this process. So that's one of the biggest issues as we look at efficiency in production. I grew up in North Dakota. I taught in western North Dakota for a little bit. And if you head out there, the oil boom is really remarkable as how things are spreading. And if you're driving at night, this used to be a common scene where you'd see these huge flare gas. Basically, it's natural gas that's being flared off in ginormous quantities across the state. They figured it was about 27 billion cubic feet of natural gas per year that was flared off in North Dakota. Why is that happening? The main reason was that, burning that and producing more or less CO2 and water was a better management of the air emissions than, letting it go into air. So compared to just letting it float off the top, it's definitely an improvement in, I guess the environmental standpoint. What they've done is they've recently invested huge amount of capital, since there's, a lot of money coming in with the oil in North Dakota. They've chosen to actually reinvest that in some infrastructure, so they're starting to collect about 35 to 40% of that natural gas. So while it's not, a significant amount, they figure the amount that they're collecting could power all the North Dakota homes for a year, or supply all their heating, that before was just, being burnt off. And then lastly, we'll look at a little bit in vehicles. One of the most interesting or fun facts I came across as I was prepping this was a research study produced out of the University of Michigan, where they talked about fuel efficiency in vehicles. From 1926 to 2006, or 1923 to 2006, over the course of 83 years, our fuel efficiency has improved by 3 miles per gallon. Now since then, since 2006, with the advent of, electric vehicles and a couple other fuel efficiency initiatives made, that number's jumping a little bit more now than it has in the past. But in general, things have little changed since the days of the Model T. And since 1991, there really has been no improvement between 1991 and 2006. So 15 years of what we consider recent technological advances have not been implemented. That said, as vehicles are becoming more efficient, currently 3 of the top 10 vehicles, at least in 2010, that we consider, I guess, gas-sipping vehicles, were U.S. made. Includes the Ford Focus, their electric vehicle, the Coda, which is based out of Southern California. It's an electric car company. It's not a car company. They're very adamant about saying that they're an electric car company. They only manufacture an electric car. So it's another electric vehicle, and then the Chevy Volt, which there's one out here that you guys can take a look at. But in general, it's kind of favorable to see that 3 of the top 10 most efficient vehicles are actually U.S. made. There's another one that's Canadian made that's little known. It's just a fleet vehicle, but lots of this is happening, close to home and is readily available. You can go now to, the car market and buy a Chevy Volt or buy an electric vehicle. The other interesting thing about electric vehicles, as the technology, if you have an internal combustion engine, over 20 years, your pollutants are going to increase, and in general, the energy is going to become what we consider dirtier. The car is going to become dirtier. The argument can be made that currently, with only 10% of our electricity provided by renewable sources, as that number grows, if you buy a green vehicle now, in 10 years it should be greener than it was now, because more of the electricity that's being used to power that vehicle is going to be coming from renewable sources. So over time, our electric vehicles will actually be getting cleaner than, dirtier, which would be typical. Really quick look at where we stand right now. Currently, about 10% of the energy produced or used in the United States comes from renewable sources. Renewable sources being everything from hydro power to solar, wind. All that amounts to this small 10% here. You'd imagine, well, we're going to have huge initiatives. We have this 25 by 25 initiative. It's still projected, according to the U.S. Energy Administration annual energy report a couple of years ago, that by 2035, only 14% of our energy would be provided by renewable sources.
Does that include the dams?
That does include, hydropower.
Hydropower.
So right now, hydropower is the #1 source of renewable energy, or what we consider renewable energy in the United States. Good question. So even with that, we aren't seeing significant increases. That said, there are some spots for that. So where's that extra, the 14% compared to the 10% going to be coming from? I'm just going to really quickly look at a couple major sources, biofuels, wind, solar, see some advances that are happening and what's really being done in those fields to account for any increases that we may see. What's interesting, and I picked this particular example because of algae, because you hear a lot about algae, and one of the biggest investors in algae as an advanced biofuel, or for the production of advanced biofuels, is Exxon. So even though they're only losing maybe 4% of their market share, they're still interested in keeping that share. So they may as well start investing in these things. Put things in perspective, right now we're making, biodiesel out of oil seeds. If you look at ethanol production, typically you can get about 250 gallons of ethanol or biofuel, you could say, per acre. Sugarcane, palm trees, both commonly used in other locations that can produce, under 1,000 gallons per acre. Algae is kind of a unique setting where they can get up to, for an acre of dedicated space for algae production, they're projecting about 2,000 gallons of fuel per acre, which is, substantially more than what some people would call, the ethanol, the corn production, and one of the main criticisms that you hear about, ethanol production, in that they always have stats along the lines of if so much, if all of our corn would go towards ethanol, it still wouldn't provide our fuel needs, or would only provide a small portion. Algae is certainly one of those options that may, over time, provide a little bit more and serve as a viable competitor with petroleum. Looking at towards that, the University of Minnesota Center for Biorefining has a system where they're basically using wastewater. So they use algae production in the cleansing of wastewater, and through that process they've been able to capture nearly 5,000 gallons of fuel per acre. Now again, they're doing it on small scale, and things scale a lot differently as you go larger. But in general, there's, for a place that has an infrastructure necessary, where you have a wastewater treatment necessary in any case, there is certainly potential to utilize that for biofuel production. Along the same lines, there is some initiatives in the United States going towards this. Just recently, some refinements have been made to the Defense Production Act of 2012, where an extra $100 million has gone towards the funding of Navy ships to use biodiesel. Now, that really will work. I mean, that $100 million of biodiesel will not run a ship for more than a week. So in the grand scheme of things, it's an extremely tiny number, but nonetheless, it's showing that there's initiative, and there's the budget going towards, from a national standpoint, going towards advanced biofuels. And when it gets into a setting of that sort, it should, grow exponentially.
What's the nature of the fuel produced by algae? Is it ethanol? Is it methane? Is it?
That's typically, and there's two actual options for that. They have fermentation they have fermentation situations where they can actually get more of an ethanol product, but typically it's going to be the high oil content, so it's similar to a biodiesel.
Okay.
And that's the wonder. I mean, like, the key is to have a fast-growing crop of whatever it may be. Jim?
I've actually heard that the oil can be burned directly. It doesn't have to be modified like vegetable oil.
Okay.
Is that correct? Is that true? Do you know?
That I don't know. I mean, I'd imagine. Yeah, I don't know, to be honest with you. No,
It was a long time ago I heard that.
yeah, and I mean, some people make the argument that refined vegetable oil doesn't have to be as well. It's just a matter of purity of product, and you can take waste vegetable oil, filter it out, and run that in your vehicles as well. But there are, yeah, I mean, it seems like there might be other considerations that you'd want to take into to take into account before you do that. We look at more what we consider traditional renewable energies, such as wind, for starting there. I think the big question, especially in Wisconsin, looking just at western Wisconsin, is do we go with big wind or small wind? In other words, do you go for those ginormous wind farms where you see these, I don't know if you've ever been driving down the highway and you see their propeller blades that are 2 semi-lengths long. Is that appropriate for the area, or is small wind more appropriate for the area? In general, if we're going to go with big wind, who's in charge of big wind? Who would be the ones who are putting in such systems?
Excel.
It'd be Xcel. It'd be your utility companies, right? Because they have more resources for that. And in turn, if they're going to be getting renewable energy, that should result in lower costs for the consumer. So typically, if you're going to get power through Xcel Energy, you're going to pay an extra 10% maybe towards your energy bill to get power sourced from wind. That said, there's a feel-good aspect that happens, but as a consumer, are you getting a payback on that? No. So the question is, small wind in the appropriate settings in western Wisconsin will, it depends on where you live. If you're living in town, small wind is not something that's feasible for you. I live in the country. We just moved out to the country about a half a year ago, and we happen to be on a hill where the wind makes it so that you can't, throw a ball with your kids even. So it makes sense that for us to put a windmill up and supply a little bit of energy for our own household, we can actually see a payback in that 5 to 6 year range. Compared to, and that's taking into account that's not going through a consultant that's charging a large consulting fee. That's it's a homemade system at that. But basically sourcing parts online and buying and installing things. There's still a reasonable payback if you have the right situations in the right wind. So in that case, the cost becomes a question of big wind versus small wind. Big wind works, but it's going to cost you a little bit more as a consumer. Small wind is going to have that upfront cost, like almost all renewable energy technologies will, but there is actually a potential for some payback.
The city is looking at putting wind turbines out in the industrial park.
Okay.
And one of the things they're looking at is the possibility of selling individual panels to citizens. Like I could buy a panel for $1,000 and it would reduce my electrical bill by a certain amount, which I think is a very interesting.
And that's a nice approach because you can actually see
right.
and you could calculate a payback, whether it's out and there's that vested interest.
Right, and lots of small people are helping to finance the production.
So you'd be buying a share in a windmill.
You'd be buying a share in a windmill. Solar. I'm sorry, it's solar. It's solar. Sorry.
Well, but in either case, I mean,
so
the idea
buy
that
a little panel.
if you're gonna get solar energy, you typically have to pay an incentive to
Right.
pay for that. That's
Right. Yeah, so you can buy it a little bit.
it's kind of the best of both worlds. That big versus small. You get the economic benefits, but it's done on a large scale.
Right.
I've heard of this called solar garden is the term.
Yeah,
It's like a
yeah.
community garden, but a solar
Right.
garden. So
That's a neat idea. Is it
Yeah.
happening or is it?
They're in the process.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they're working on it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
This is just kind of to add, and it's a little difficult to pick up some of the colors. It talks about average wind speed in Wisconsin. This is more on the big side of things. So you can see this is at 80 meters. So this is, once we go 250 feet in the air, or in the sky. We don't have the massive wind speeds that you'd see more across the western Midwest. If you want to do big wind, it makes sense to do it more in the plains to our west. But for Wisconsin, big wind doesn't seem to be our best option until you get maybe closer to the coast, towards Green Bay, or along some of the Great Lakes area. You can make wind feasible. But right now, maybe it's not our best bet, at least on the big side of things for western Wisconsin. Looking at solar, same sort of situation. Solar is a wonderful solution for renewable energies. Right now, the Sunshot Initiative at the Department of Energy has recognized 17 solar energy zones. So they're like primo, this area should be designated for solar alone. So it's amounts to about 285,000 acres throughout the southwestern United States. And that's what they consider, it's primed for utility scale development of solar energy. So these areas have been recognized as being, basically hotbeds for solar energy. They figured along with that there's about 19 million variance acres where they say it's still very credible usage as utility scale, but not to the same primo area. That said, it's certainly not anywhere near Wisconsin. So, having a solar hot water heater may make sense. Utility scale solar is not going to happen here. Not, the next, hopefully soon, but sooner than I think, but not with our current technology in the next decades. The general idea is that Sunshot, the Department of Energy initiative, has recognized that if they can reduce the cost for solar installations by 75%, that's what it's going to take for a widespread solar usage across the country. That's where it'll become more readily available for the consumers. So rather than working on increasing the efficiency from 14% to 15% or whatever it may be, the goal in recent initiatives is going to be to bring the price and the cost of installing and developing these technologies down. And that's where you're going to see, hopefully, the biggest innovations in the next, not too far off distance.
Is that where thin layer solar comes into play?
Yeah, that goes in between everything from printing off solar panels on a printer, basically.
Right.
There's all sorts of innovative technologies along those lines, and
Nanotech stuff.
it's just a matter of how we can actually implement that. And
Right.
right now, it's
Oh,
at that fundamental development side.
and I just read about a window that they're developing that can produce electricity. It's a thin layer coating, I think, on the window. Thin layer solar coating on the window that can produce energy. So your windows can produce electricity from the solar that comes in through there.
And if you look at the Department of Energy is applying their their resources towards a lot of technology similar to that. You can find almost any department of the government providing their Department of Transportation, for example. They are looking at solar roads. I mean, they've invested some money, and right now, I don't know if you've ever seen those videos for the solar roads, but the idea is cover the road with, basically make a glass road that has, solar panels built in underneath it, and you have your built-in infrastructure, so distribution is never an issue because roads go everywhere. Now, that idea is a little bit off, and the cost is nowhere feasible at this point, but it's
We work here.
yeah, yeah, we're here. Yeah.
But if they can in Germany have solar panels on most of the roofs, then we can certainly have more solar here.
Oh yeah, there's
They get something like 22% of their energy from solar in their climate like ours.
Yeah, their climate may even be not as clear as ours, at least.
But instead of bringing the cost of solar down, they went the economic route, and they brought the cost of solar down by incentivizing it. So this feed-in tariff is the economic model that they've used. It's been enormously successful there. The other way of getting, without increasing 25% in efficiency, if you tax the heck out of carbon, it accomplishes the same thing without the technical hurdles.
And yeah, that was one of the main things I was going to mention when we get to the responsibility side.
Sorry.
No, you're right on. I think that's where we need to be looking too. Is what can we do to make this happen? And Germany's taken the initiative to say this is something that's important to us, and we're willing to incentivize it. But it has nothing to do with the technology. It has nothing to do with the clearness of the day or the sunshine they have. It has to do with politics. Looking more specifically towards what's available in Western Wisconsin, what makes sense for us in Western Wisconsin. The thing you see, and I think there's one or two exhibitors inside talking about geothermal energy. Eau Claire Electric Cooperative in the surrounding area has about 500 members who are currently powering their homes or heating their homes partially off of geothermal energy, which in the grand scheme of things is a very significant number. They figure 2 to 4% of people across the United States can utilize or in some part utilize geothermal energy. General idea in the stats you see thrown around on any pamphlets that get handed out is that it can reduce your heating cost by 70%. It can reduce your cooling cost by 30%. Before the general technology that's being used in geothermal is related to it's basically the refrigeration cycle. It's moving cool air from one spot or cool resources from one spot to a spot that's warm and vice versa. So in the winter, we're getting our heat from the ground where there's a temperature differential from the outside, and similarly in the summer we do the same thing. Same reason that breweries use caves for refrigeration. It's cooler underground, and that temperature is constant throughout the year. When there's a differential, you can supplement your heating costs. That said, if your home's not efficient, it may not make sense. You can make all these improvements and supply all your energy by sustainable or renewable sources. If your home's not efficient and you're wasting that energy, it doesn't make sense. You may have a payback that no longer makes sense. And generally, they argue the payback on geothermal to be between 2 and 10 years, depending on the situation. How you can get a 2 years, return on a $20,000 system, I'm yet to be able to calculate, but that's that's what I've seen argued, at least by the company selling the stuff. Yeah. A couple other things, and I'll review them in a little bit in the next couple slides, is biomass, anaerobic digestion, hydropower, and fuel cells in the area. My favorite in the bunch, just because I've worked with it a lot at CVTC as we're looking at, what's going to hit Wisconsin next and what's going to be most appropriate for our farming communities and for the communities in general, is anaerobic digestion. So the idea is taking waste, organic waste of some sorts, whether it's manure, whether it's post-consumer food product, whether it's pre-consumer food product, any organic matter in essence, and converting that to a methane gas or to a biofuel. Locally, it's been happening. It's happening. Five Star Dairy is the most notable example. I think it was in 2006 they put in their system, and they figure they have the capacity to power. I believe it's over 500 homes or heat over 500 homes with the amount of natural gas that's being produced. Similarly, Bush Brothers is projecting with their wastewater treatment or their anaerobic digestion wastewater treatment that they can power about 500 homes with bean power. Basically, their bean waste product that's being processed in a little bit different manner. So that's a wet anaerobic digester. That's happening with a low solid content, where it's happening basically in a big pool of water with about 10% solids perhaps. The dry digestion was happening with manure digesters, and with typically a consumer waste would be 20 to 30% or higher solids content. The big technological advances that I see happening in here is that the technology is extremely simple. You have a container that holds waste, and you're putting animals and little germs in there that are basically doing all the work for you. So they're hydrolyzing this material. It's going to a second container where that material is then being more or less fermented, and you're producing your biogas. The big advantages aren't necessarily going to be happening with efficiency. I think it's going to happen with the scaling of things. Am I sitting okay with time-wise?
Yeah.
We got him started a little bit later.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Give him a
I'll be real quick. Sorry. So the big difference is going to happen in the scale side. Five Star Dairy is about a 900 cow dairy, so it can happen. They have a huge amount of waste, and the process makes sense for them at that point. As we bring that technology down to a smaller scale, it becomes more feasible for the food production. With a Nestle in town or with the Silver Springs in town, it makes sense for smaller companies to be able to actually utilize that technology. And the scale has been able to decrease quite a bit. There's a couple of companies locally that are working with this. And then the one that I've worked with or talked with a little bit, Zero Waste Energy out of Oregon, that's got a scaled down system. Again, the scaled down systems, just like solar power, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in the Netherlands, it just hasn't come here. To show that we are kind of the central part of it, though, there's an small-scale anaerobic digestion conference coming up in September, I believe, and it's happening in Stevens Point. So it makes sense for Western Wisconsin because we have, a bunch of dairy farms that have about 250 cattle, and that's the size at which these things start to work. I'm probably running late, so I'll really quickly breeze over. If you have any questions about biofuels and biomass, I've done a little research in seeing what's appropriate here. Would love to get into the chemistry of all the different ways that we can process these things, whether it's biochemical conversions, thermochemical, or photobiological. For time restraints, I'll save that for any questions that you may have after the fact. Really quickly, I want to get to who's responsible for these changes and how is this actually going to happen, because that's really the question that we have. First of all, who's the general public? I really wish it was people right here, because that would make things a lot easier. Typically, people who are coming to sustainability fairs are willing to put an extra 10% towards having your power supplied by wind or whatever it may be. In general, we have to understand that the general population is the one that's looking for the energy the cheapest way. And right now that's not renewable. So we have to make energy cheaper if we're going to have this happen. Business and industry, we can look at from an investment standpoint, and the fact that Goldman Sachs, for example, is committed to providing about $40 billion in investment towards clean technology companies. So if you have investment firms on the business and industry side of things that are investing in this, it's not just, Xcel Energy should put 30% of the resources towards this or whatever you may believe. It's the fact that there's outside people that can invest in, they see the benefit in this. Large corporations are doing plenty. If you look at the Dow Chemical Research, or their research and development page online, it would definitely be worth looking through. The government devotes about 5% of its budget towards small business innovative research. On that side of things, we can do these things on a smaller scale. Small businesses are being supported, and lots of those funding, whether it's through Department of Energy or whether it's through Department of Defense, lots of that funding is still energy related. And then looking at the energy co-ops, as we discussed earlier, there's that argument between who's actually going to be paying for this energy. Quick government is, clearly going to be responsible, and they can make a big impact. If you look at the Family and Business Tax Cut Certainty Act of 2012, it's, the vote's going to be happening pretty soon, in the next month or so. We're looking at where are we getting the tax credits, whether it's in the biodiesel production or whether it's in oil production. They basically, at this point, are ready to renew and extend some research and development tax credits. They're looking to really promote, via incentives and tax cuts, renewable energy. And then they've actually devoted about 16 million acres of public lands for energy development, meaning that solar energy companies can utilize this land without expense to themselves, and it's basically Pentagon land that they're opening up for energy use. I'll probably wrap things up here just because I am already over a little bit. General idea, the other way that the government can help is regulations. Typically, we were always worried about air emissions. 10 years ago, they were looking at sulfur dioxide or sulfur emissions and NOx gas emissions. If we change that, as Dr. Bolter was mentioning, to CO2 emissions and looking at restricting that and cap and trade on CO2, that's where we see the actual change in what type of technology we're using, not just how we're using technology that we are. Lastly, wrap it up. Who's responsible for the fundamental research? It comes down to the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and the university system. Whatever it may be, doing the fundamental basic research that's maybe not, otherwise financially feasible or doesn't make sense for the corporations, but through cooperation with corporations, they can make it, feasible on a more of an applied scale. And I'll gladly take the side of technical college and argue that we have a responsibility as technical college to not only apply that research, but to show how it can, be utilized and train people towards using that research as well.
One quick question.
Mm-hmm.
The land that opened up, that the government's opening up, is that being opened up to gas exploration? Is that what it's being
That's a good question. This was explicitly opened up for what we call renewable energy exploration. So it was,
but that doesn't include fracking?
That did not include fracking. That was just devoted towards basically utility scale solar and utility scale wind. Other than that, do you have any questions? Contact information.
This program was recorded and presented by Chippewa Valley Community Television. Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you'd like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cvctv.org.